I know this is physically exhausting, but I know it'll get emotionally
Yeah, exactly.
exhausting. And
It
I
gets,
think I rather, yeah, the
yeah,
simplicity of bedtime battles, I'll
yeah,
take that any day
yeah.
over those tricky conversations you're going to have with a teenager.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. Sometimes when my kids are like, "Oh, mama," like cuddling me or whatever, like especially the little one, she's always like trying to give me hugs and always like this. And even, they're 2.5 years apart. Sometimes I'll try to cuddle the older daughter and she's just like, "Okay, like get off of me. Like, what are you
Oh, no.
doing?" And I'm like, "You're only 4. Why are you telling me this?"
Yeah.
Welcome to the Angelic Frequency Podcast. We're your hosts, Cristina Roche.
And Luisa.
We are so excited to dive into the episode today where we are going to be talking about all things motherhood, parenthood, children, souls coming in, how that all plays out, how it works, and kind of seeing where the conversation goes. So I'm excited to dive in.
I'm so excited to dive in. Yeah, this is such an amazing topic because it's not only like an outlet, like to talk about something that's very universal to a lot of people and how to navigate that with the angels, but yeah, super interesting stuff around divine feminine and soul
Yeah.
journeys and guardian angels, and I have a million questions about those things. So it's
Yeah.
gonna be an interesting one for me too to pick your brain.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I can't wait. And I feel like some of these things too, I don't think that I ever really thought about until I personally became a mom and like,
Yeah.
I think that's natural for all of us where we don't really think about something or understand it fully until we're in the situation and then you're kind of like, "Oh, like there's questions that I have now and I'm curious about this and how does this work?" And now I'm being called into a deeper understanding for myself, with guardian angels and
Yeah.
understanding the divine beings that surround not just us personally, but also now our kids and how we can work with them to support our children and just everything. I feel like it's just so much that we can cover with this. So,
There's, yeah, absolutely so much. And just a lack of awareness you have before having
yeah.
to learn about so many things. And just creating space for all of that. But it's such an interesting transition for women, I feel, too. And in
Mhm.
my specific experience, the angels were really important when I became pregnant, and then through the process and how much I had to grieve almost
Yeah.
a time in my life and what I felt like it was my identity, my individuality, my independence. And there was a
Mhm.
process of course, joy and excitement about what was coming next, but also a wave of like, yeah, just grieving my old
Yeah.
self that I knew was not coming back. In my particular case, Raphael was really important. For
Mm.
some reason, he was the one who was with me at the time, of course, because it's a very physical thing that you go through as well. And
Yeah.
I'm guessing, but yeah, it was super interesting and harder than
Yeah.
I thought. Not only because physically you're going through so much, and I think I told you the story and how when I found out I was pregnant, I have the opposite reaction as opposed to like, let's relax and take it easy. I was like,
Mm.
no, this is not going to change me. I'm going to work out even harder. I'm going to do all
Right.
the things. Uh,
Yeah.
Backfired big time. And of course, my body was like, no, you need to stop and take care of yourself. And this is not about you anymore. There's
Yep.
someone else coming through, and you need to make space for that. So that was interesting, an interesting shift,
Mhm.
and how much acceptance and just, yeah, just letting and exercising, just letting go and
Yeah.
trusting of the process.
Yeah. It really calls you into just removing any thoughts or ideas that you thought or that you planned or that you think
Yeah.
should happen this way. And I mean, that's the same with even going through labor and like the delivery of the baby.
Hmm.
Like you just have no control. Like you have to trust in the process of how that happens.
Yeah.
And then even, yeah, like postpartum. And I feel like for me, I mean, I experienced transition and like what you mentioned about grief and kind of letting go of an identity both times, which surprised me the second time.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously the first time it's like you
Yeah.
go from no kids to kids, and
Shock
that's a big
system.
change because you all of a sudden went from independence to someone being completely dependent on you. And so that's a huge change. And then going into my second one, there's some aspects that I think were a little bit easier just because I knew what to expect more in terms of like postpartum recovery, the demand of being a mom. I was already in mom mode anyway. So I already
Right.
knew what it felt like to be taking care of a little human
Yeah.
24/7. So that part wasn't as shocking. But I feel like for me personally, I still went through an identity crisis, we'll call it like
So
an identity
interesting.
crisis. And this, like, similar to what you just said about how when you got pregnant, you were like, no, I'm going to like keep going and doing all the things. I felt that postpartum after the second
Okay.
born, where I was trying to go back to the same level of productivity and like doing all these things, and definitely felt this sense of like, okay, I got to get back into business. Like, what are we doing next? And da 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 da, and all these things. And there was so much resistance and so much of this energy that was like, no, like that's not what we're doing right now. And I think
Mm-hmm.
I had a hard time. It was weird because it's on one hand, it's like I'm not transitioning into a mom identity because I already was in that, but it still shifted how I viewed myself and how I viewed my responsibility now taking care of two children,
Mm-hmm.
and how that kind of shifted everything. And so it definitely called me to slow down even more, reassess how I was viewing myself, not just as a mom, but also just as an entrepreneur and as a business owner and as, who I am as the world knows me as a healer
Right.
and as a spiritual teacher and all that. And it really it was hard. It was hard. My daughter was born in March. And so it was like that spring and then summer trying to push and do things. And then having this like pushback of like, no, you're trying to go too fast, like slow
Right.
down. And like I said, having this identity crisis, like, who am I? What am I doing? I don't know anymore. Like, am I supposed to be doing this still? It was all these questions that came up.
Yeah.
And then finally coming into a space of like towards the end of the summer into the fall of like, wait a second, this is who I am. It was almost like a remembrance back to who I was. It
Mm-hmm.
almost felt like I had lost myself along the way and trying to push towards something that wasn't actually who I was, and then coming back full circle into remembering who I truly was meant to be, if that makes
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And it's such an interesting time in life because I think there's so much pressure on like women in general in this day and age that we just have to do everything and being an entrepreneur, but also being a great mom and a great
Yeah.
partner. And there's just so many roles and so many expectations around what you have to do,
Yeah.
which is absolutely impossible. There's no way to do everything and do it right and
Yeah.
just perform at the same level that you did before. It's just absolutely unrealistic. But we've created that expectation and that there's
Yeah.
so much fear attached to saying that we just can't, that there's no
Mhm.
way a human has capacity to do it all.
Yes.
Um, but we've fought, so much for so long,
Yeah.
just to get here, like, and to get, our rights and to have a
Mhm.
sense of equality. So it's hard to give something up and to feel like we're giving away some of that space that we've created, I think. So it's like, what
Yeah.
do you mean? Of course I can be a corporate mom. I can
Yeah.
do it. Like, well, can you? And are you giving
Exactly.
yourself space and time to be a mom?
Mhm.
And are you giving yourself time and grace as well? Like, you're only human. You're running on 2 hours sleep, and then you wake up
Yeah.
and you're on a meeting at 8 a.m. in the morning, and you expect your brain to just function just like that. Like,
Right.
it's not the case. So there's a lot of that. But then on the spiritual side of things too, that embracing that divine feminine energy and all the
Mm.
wisdom that comes with that, and tapping into that ancestral energy and just embracing the fact that you can slow down, you can focus on this, it's okay, and you're supported and guided in that process, and connecting to your femininity like that. I think we try to overcorrect and lean towards our masculinity, and we're productive, we're overachievers, and we do anything. But it's okay to lean into your feminine energy, take a step back. It's a different stage in time and in your life, and everything's a season, right? There will be a time when we'll be able to go back full force to other things. But yeah, it's really, really tricky to navigate.
Yeah, and that's such a great point that you brought with that divine feminine and actually leaning into it and what it means to be in your divine feminine, which is surrender, which is the nurturing. It is the, kind of going more with the flow versus like having this set plan that you need to follow step by step, and kind of having that like go 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 energy versus leaning in and surrender type of energy. And it doesn't mean that you're not doing anything, because you're still doing so
All the
much.
things, yeah.
Yeah. But I think, like, going to your point, it really does call us into more of that, because especially as a mom, I feel like for mothers, especially, obviously you grew a child for 9 months. And so your body is just naturally in that state. And to try to cut that off, I feel like, prematurely, in the sense of like, hey, baby's born, go back and be productive. Your body is like, no, I'm not ready for that.
No, yeah.
I just birthed the baby. Like, I need to be in this energy of nurturing and caring, because that's just what the body knows. Like, that's the wisdom, I feel, of the body coming forward,
I think, yeah.
And then, like you said, that's one of the things actually that I always also kind of am aware of and have taught about in the past, is how our ancestors are very present. I mean, they can be present in many different times of our life, but I've found that they also come forward when either there's a new energy, a new soul born is part of that lineage, and also during death. Like, they come through during those time periods, like major life transitions, either transitioning in or transitioning out, as well as other times, of course. But that's one of the times too where I feel like connection with our ancestors can really help in supporting us as we transition. I mean, imagine the baby, that soul going through the transition of like, where am I? This cold world, like, what's happening? And then we are going through a transition, regardless if it's your first child or your fifth child or whatever. There's always a transition that's happening, I feel like, and not to exclude dads at all, but because we love them and they're amazing, and they have an important role. But of course, we're speaking from our personal experience as women, from the mother perspective. And so I feel like during those transitional moments, as a mom moving into this next stage of life, our ancestors are very supportive in that as well.
That's so interesting. Yeah, it's definitely a time when, and I guess you can answer this question for us, and it's that sense of that we come in we have little star families, or we have little like soul families that we come from, and everyone seems to gather around birth and death, because we're just part of this group on the other side, if that makes sense. So being part of that moment, it's important for the collective.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when it comes to, I feel like when it comes to, experiencing that connection, or, just kind of like, I don't know, being connected, I don't feel like it's necessarily needing to, know who's there and what are their messages or whatever, but I feel like it's an overall feeling of support. And I know that for me personally, when I was going through, especially like the actual birthing process and like labor and all that, I could feel like I didn't know exactly. I wasn't paying attention to like who is coming in, like which ancestors and who's that or whatever. But it was more so just an experience of feeling very supported spiritually.
Yeah, there was
And
a
I
lot
think
of people in that room.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think that that's something that is not talked about, but needs to be talked about. Like people talk about, of course, the medical side of things and preparation, whatever the different practices and breathing and whatever, hypnobirthing is a thing and all that. But I do feel like the spiritual side of understanding how on a spiritual level we can be supported as
Mhm.
well is really important for people to know, and that it goes beyond just the birthing. It's forever, not
Yeah.
just for ourselves, but as a parent, whether you're a mom or a dad, like as a parent, to understand that you're, like you were saying, like we're part of this system, like this
Yeah.
family system on a soul level. And so there's that other support on the other side that is there to guide not just your child as a person, as their own individual, but also within the context of your relationship as
Right.
well, you know?
Yeah. It's such an interesting time from so many perspectives. Yeah, when you think about it from a spiritual, like not to get into the physical and the hormones and the yeah, the expectation to bounce back when your organs are all over the place, your
Yeah.
hormones are all over the place, and the expectation to go back to a desk, it's just impossible. So definitely the nurturing and the grace we need to give ourselves to be in that energy and to be patient and to give ourselves time to go back to never will we go back to who we were before, but this new version of ourselves. But from a spiritual perspective, that's something that also came through for me a lot. What about this soul that's coming in and just a sense of
Mm.
gratitude for, okay, I don't know why you chose me and why I need to
Yeah.
be your mom this time around, but I hope really that I can do whatever it is that you need me to do for you, and just kind of making that commitment, and having
Yeah.
that awareness that there's that contract, right? And
Yeah.
that I need to do something for you. You're going to do so much for me as well. So
Yeah.
that helped me a lot through that, moving through that like grieve and transition. That was kind of
Mhm.
hard. So that was kind of my way out of it, and just the excitement about what is she gonna, what is she gonna
Yeah.
teach me? What are we supposed to do together? And just the
Yes.
excitement around what that relationship was gonna be like,
Yeah.
and understanding, also having a lot of empathy for her. What you just said, it's a baby that just came from source. She's having so much fun up in wherever you think we come from, and then going back to earth, being embodied.
Yeah.
It's so hard. Everything hurts. You get out
Yeah.
of your safe space inside mom, and then there you are, cold and hungry and confused, and there's
Yeah.
all these things and people. And so it's just very, very, it has to be a very hard time to,
Yeah.
for that little brave little soul that's just starting. And also, oh my god, you're just getting started, you have so much, to go through.
Yeah.
And being a human is just really hard. Like that's an interesting process, because you usually don't remember your own childhood,
Right.
and going through it through the lens of your own child is so interesting, but it's
Yes.
just so hard. We
Yes.
can't even sit up
Yeah.
right. You have to grow teeth, then you lose them
Yeah.
again, then you get them again. It's just a whole thing.
It's so crazy.
Yeah,
It's
it's so
so
crazy.
wild. Yeah. And I've often thought about that. And I remember especially when my kids were that in that like newborn stage.
Yeah,
And with my older daughter, I remember she had like, I think it was maybe around 6 weeks old. For 2 to 3 weeks, she had that, people call it the witching hour, where
yeah,
they just have that time period where they're just nonstop crying. And so as a first time mom, it would be like clockwork. Like at 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, she would just start to cry. And
yeah,
nothing that we did would help her. She wasn't hungry. She wasn't, like
yeah,
her diapers, like all that. And it's just all I could do was play music, and I would just hold her, and I would just like kind of like sway and dance,
yeah.
and eventually she would fall asleep. But it would go
Hey,
for like an hour or 2 hours. And I remember thinking like, what's happening? But also during that time period, I would be calling on the angels, and I would be, tuning into her spirit and just trying to bring that sense of ease. And like I would say things like, you're safe, it's okay, like I know that this is hard for you to be coming into this human world. And I would try to just talk like that to her spirit. And I honestly never really received any sort of confirmation, like from her soul, like, okay, yeah, thank you. Like,
Thank
this
you.
is getting easier now
Hear that.
or
That is
whatever.
great.
It was one of those, like, no validation, like no confirmation that what I was doing was quote unquote working. But I just trusted that whatever I was doing that moment was
Yeah.
helping her on some
On
level.
some level, you have to trust is going to connect with a part of her. However, yeah, that happens. Another interesting thing, there's so much empathy. I had so much empathy for her experience, as hard as my experience was, because yeah, postpartum is awful and all the things, but that helped me a lot. That perspective of, oh my gosh, she's just getting started. She's just
Yeah.
coming out of like this other plane in here, and it has to be so difficult. And trying to speak to her on that like soul level, like,
Mm,
you made this decision. We're gonna try and make it as best as we can. But yes, this is a
yeah.
hard place to navigate. I'm so sorry, but I'm going to help you as much as we can. So even having those like mental conversations and
Mhm.
trying to connect with her on that level really made a difference. And also something else that I do, and I've spoken about this, is just tuning into her angels.
Right.
And like, oh my God,
Yes.
help her calm down, help her sleep,
Yes.
or help me understand what she needs, things like that.
Yes.
That yeah, sometimes they seem to work and make a difference. But
Yeah, totally. And I think that that's such a great way to, because obviously for a little kid who can't speak, can't communicate, all they do is cry when they need something. So, obviously there's the instinct, you kind of know, but sometimes you don't know.
yeah,
And you're just like, what do they need right now? And I feel like that's the other part of it too, is trusting in your own intuition. I feel like sometimes, and especially culturally, there can be this feeling of, well, it has to be like this, and they have to start sleeping through the night by this age, and this is how it needs to happen, and
the
like just kind of
pressure,
like feel this
yes.
pressure, which I know that part of it is because we as parents are pressured to show up in society and perform and go back to work and all those things. So that it kind of naturally trickles down, I think, to these expectations that we place on babies of like when things need to happen. But I feel like that was one of my biggest lessons too with my older daughter, was letting go of this, like, she needs to be sleeping through the night by this age and doing this and blah blah blah, and instead just trusting in my instinct and my intuition to support her in what she needs, and trusting in her own timing of things rather than
Mhm.
trying to force her to do something or accomplish something by a certain time period just because that's what society tells us to do,
Yeah, it's such a
you know
surrender. It's just a complete lack of control over
yeah,
situations, and you just can't force it with them. There's just no
yeah,
way, or with yourself at that point.
yeah,
There's just no point in forcing yourself to do certain things, or for them to achieve a certain milestone. But we've created this perception of this version of being a parent these days, where it's wonderful that we're learning, and
mm,
we're all striving to be better parents, and there's always something new, and there's so much more psychology and studies and information around so many things. We just had no
yeah,
idea
right.
what babies were about until,
Yeah.
yeah, we still don't know so much about the human condition. But with all that information also comes a certain expectation that is just
Mhm.
really not realistic, even in the way that we live today.
Yeah.
And as a society, there's not a tribe anymore. There's not a support system. The village is not
Right.
here. No one's coming to
Yes.
help, and that's the case for at least in North America. Is very isolated. It's an
Yeah.
isolated experience, and I see that with my friends back home in Latin America. It's such a different experience, and such a blessing and a curse at the same time, because when you
Mm.
have your parents and your in-laws and everyone kind of supporting and meddling, Uh,
Mhm.
that can be good and bad. But that's definitely not the case here. And on top of it, if you're going on social media and then you
Oh my
see this
gosh.
very unrealistic expectation of what motherhood is like, and you just feel completely inadequate. And
Yeah.
there's such an emotional, vulnerable time in your life where you should
Mhm.
be enjoying it, where you should be surrendering, where you should be doing all sorts of things, and then you're just completely absorbed by these impossible expectations.
Yeah.
It's really hard to be a parent these days,
Yeah.
I
Oh
think.
yeah. 1,000%. And I think that that's such an important thing you touched on with the village and the lack of the village and how we weren't meant to raise kids just on our own, you know? And I remember, I forget it was when I was pregnant or if it was maybe shortly after in postpartum, but I remember seeing something or hearing something somewhere about how it's like these like circles of support, right? Like
Hmm.
the baby and the mom are at the center, but then there needs to be support for the mom, not so even so much. I mean, obviously taking care of the baby and like giving the mom a break, but really like the support for the mother
Yeah.
who is fully in that space of recovery and healing from birth, but then also taking care of the baby. And, because that's that primal connection between mother and baby because the
Yes.
baby grew up, in the womb. And so that's what it knows. And then just having that support, like support for the mom, support for the people who are supporting the mom, and just kind of like having this, like you said, a village of people who are there, that I think is very much lacking. And for me, I had my daughter in 2020, like September 2020, so it was like right in the
Pandemic
middle of
baby. Yeah.
COVID. Yeah, pandemic baby. It was still, I think at that point it wasn't as, I mean, we were still in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And, it was still very much like just very isolating, on top of the fact that, not only is the experience of becoming a mom and having a baby already in and of itself very isolating because you're going through so much. But on top of that, you put a pandemic there and
Yeah.
it's just a whole different experience. It's crazy.
It was wild. Yeah. It was so deeply isolating at that time, and going to like medical like appointments, and then no one could go in with you, and you had a mask, so it became just this impersonal,
Yeah.
awful, lonely experience, as opposed to that time in your life when you're surrounded by
Yeah.
some sort of community or system. Yeah, it became really challenging. I have the same experience, and it was hard to navigate like that. But then at the same time, I took it as such a blessing, because in that isolation you could also, it's just us. We have to figure this
Right.
out, and we got the space to navigate and figure that out on our
Yeah.
own, and
Yeah.
experience being parents for the first time, and do it
Yeah.
our own way and
Yeah.
learn. I have so many questions about this topic, because I've read all sorts of different things around how souls come in. When do you
Mm-hmm.
connect with your guardian angel for the first time? Some people say
Yeah.
it's like later in life, a few years after. Some say it's before you even come. From your firsthand information, uh, can you walk us a little bit through that process?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, this is just, coming from my own experience,
Yeah.
my own kind of connection and understanding of it. But from what I understand of it, we as souls choose our guardian angels, and maybe not necessarily, it's not like I'm like, okay, you're going to be my guardian angel, and you and you and you. Maybe it's not even necessarily like that, but maybe, through the divine kind of places us together,
Mm-hmm.
like that. But essentially, from what I understand, it's kind of like that team of angels and your spirit team is chosen prior to the soul incarnating. So before the soul even comes in, they're kind of set, like these are the beings that will be with you. And then I do also believe that in the womb the soul doesn't enter in right away, like as from the moment of conception. I do
Oh,
also believe
interesting.
that it comes in a little bit later through gestation, like I want to say like between 20 and 23 weeks
Okay.
of in pregnancy, like halfway through basically is
Okay.
when the soul comes in. And it's not to say that you can't connect with your baby prior to that, because the soul, it's almost like, imagine that as conception happens and as the baby is developing, there's like almost like a strain like connects already to the soul, but the soul doesn't quite enter and is like existing in more on the earthly plane until later on through the
Okay.
pregnancy.
Okay.
That's been my understanding. And it was really through my own curiosity of like, I want, like, when do the souls come in? And that's just what always kept coming through as the information. And people have asked me different contexts and things like that. And it's been consistently like around halfway, 20 to 23 weeks specifically are the numbers that I see when I say
Yeah.
that. And so from that point, it's kind of like the soul is more integrated into the physical being. And then obviously, after that, it's there. And then the guardian angels start to be more physically present once the soul kind of enters in, So prior to that, the soul is more on a spiritual plane, and then it kind of starts to do its transition onto the earthly plane
Yeah.
around that time.
Okay, that's super interesting. And then something else that has come up in like books and things is when potentially you have a loss, but then the baby or that soul seems to be waiting for mom there, and that connection is still established, even if it
Yeah,
wasn't meant to go on
right.
for a very long time. But whatever that connection needed to happen on a physical level, but then the
Yes.
baby still or waiting for mom and connecting
Yeah.
to mom on that level.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great question. From my understanding of that is that there's always that soul connection that happens. So even if the baby doesn't physically come to be, there has it like that connection was established. And so whether or not, like, I do believe that sometimes, after miscarriages and women get pregnant again and they do have a baby after that, sometimes the baby, it just was timing or whatever the personal journey is, which is a
Yeah.
lot of different types of lessons and things that people have to go through, regarding that. But sometimes I do believe that that soul then incarnates through the second pregnancy or whatever, the pregnancy
Oh, interesting.
afterwards. However, I don't believe that that's always the case. I feel like sometimes the soul stays on the spiritual plane, but there's still that connection. There's still that connection of between the mom and, the parents overall and that soul, knowing that that being is there. And sometimes people will connect to that through as like as an angel, like their angel baby, and their baby is watching over them. And I do believe that sometimes it is a pathway to opening up to that understanding and to that
Right.
deep connection, and that soul maybe wasn't always necessarily meant to be born, but they were meant to be there to
And be part of
watch
the
over
family
you and
somehow.
be part of the family on that level. Yeah.
It's amazing because yeah, I've heard stories about, well, that's really a really important distinction, because you don't necessarily have to attach that other baby's personality to the next one, assuming that, oh, it's him
Yeah.
again or her.
Yeah.
That's important to know, although it can happen, because I've
Yeah.
heard of stories of people, like little children, saying like, oh, I'm playing with my imaginary friend and his name was so
Mm.
and so, and he's like, oh, that was the name of your brother that was never
Oh,
born, and
yeah,
things like
yeah,
that, so that
yeah.
there's that
Yeah.
connection early on with their
Yeah.
siblings
Yes.
too. That's another thing that I've heard and I've always been curious about.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard of that too. And yeah, in that case, it is that soul wasn't meant to come into human form, but is still there, very much
Very
present
much
with the
connected.
family.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's so
Yeah.
interesting. Okay, night guardian angels. And this blew my mind when I first met you and started to connect with you about this. The fact that we don't necessarily have just the one,
Right.
but many, that's a
Yes.
shock. That was a shock to me. I was like, what
Yes.
do you
I
mean?
know.
Multiple guardian angels. That's amazing. Um, and why, and like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and honestly for me too, when I started to, which was pretty early on, I'd say in my path or, career as an angel channel and spiritual teacher. I forget when I started to do garden angel readings. If it must have been maybe 2018. But regardless, when I started to become aware of that and, I was kind of guided in that direction to support people in their connection with their guardian angels,
Hmm.
it was something that I was like, oh, okay. I think before that, I didn't really have a conception. I think you hear about like, oh, we have our one guardian angel, but I don't think that I necessarily believe that as the truth. And so as I started to explore my own personal connection with my guardian angels and then supporting other people in being able to have that connection, it became very clear, like almost right away, that we don't just have one, we have multiple. And there's not just that single role that we think of, like here as the guardian and as the
Yeah.
protector and making sure that you're safe, which of course they have that, they do have that role, but there's so much more than that,
Hmm.
and they're kind of there as the personal angelic guides to help your soul follow the path and fulfill the path that you have come here to fulfill. So I see it as kind of like going back to what I was saying earlier of, before we incarnate, the spirit team is chosen and we kind of have this team, and it's almost like I can almost imagine, I don't know if this is actually how it is, but I can imagine it as like you have your debriefing meeting, like, okay, this is the soul plan, this is what you're going to go to earth to do. We're going to support you, but you're not going to remember that. And so like these are going to be the lessons that you're going to learn, and this is going to be the experience and the challenges and all that, and kind of almost like this blueprint of like, this is going to be your path and this is going to be your potential, but you're going to have to use your free will to choose that and whatever, all the stuff. And then it's kind of like, all right, team ready? Okay, let's go.
Let's
And
do
then
this. Yeah.
boom, soul comes in.
Just shifting from the traditional guardian angel that's protecting you to it's a system, it's many,
Yeah.
and they all have different roles and even personalities and
Yeah.
roles and function. It's just absolutely amazing to me that that is how it works, and just connecting with them like that has made such an incredible difference in my journey, and be able to tap into their individual roles and like, so and so help me with this, or so and so we're
Yeah.
going through this, and feeling their presence depending on what's going on in life
Yeah.
has been really really interesting. And learning to read their signs. We were talking about this before, and how just by tapping into who is showing up for you can give you
Mhm.
clues into what they're trying to communicate and what you need to pay attention to. So
Yes.
any
Yes.
given angel can give you a hint like, oh, this has to do with divine feminine, this has to do with
Mhm.
energy, this has to do with soul path, like whatever it is.
Yeah.
So that blew my mind. The name
Yeah.
too, that is the best.
I know that it's so funny because, I've done a lot of guardian angel readings for people at this point, and I've seen the whole spectrum of names and how they come in. Like some names are just so just plain, like whatever, like David or Mark or whatever, just very kind of like regular names. And then there's other names that are very out there and very different. And it's
Yeah,
kind of like, that's a different type of name. And sometimes I have to take a moment and be like, so how do you spell that? Like, let me spell
I
this out for
know.
my
Yeah,
client so that we know how
they
to
sound.
say, or I've also had angels come in and saying like specifically like this is how you pronounce it. It's not Ariel, it's Ariel, or like whatever, things like that, where there's a specific pronunciation
Mhm.
regarding their name.
That's so interesting, because that's when I think, of course, names must be for our benefit.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like
definitely.
they do, but the fact that they do that, and that there's so much attention to detail, does tell me like, maybe you like this too a little bit.
Yeah.
This is
Exactly.
for me, and this is my, this, you need to communicate with me somehow, but you're enjoying this and you like that.
Yes.
You
Yes.
like to pronounce it a certain way. But yeah, that was a super interesting conversation we had around their names, because yes, some of them are super complex and seem like ancient or foreign or
Mhm.
like very different,
Yeah.
but some of them are so modern and almost human like. That is,
Yeah.
does that also gives you a clue into that type of angel? We've talked about potentially them having different ages, like if that
Yeah.
makes
Yeah.
sense,
Yeah.
but some of them being more, yeah, I don't know, modern
Yeah.
angels, and some of them
Yeah.
being more ancient. I don't know. Is it what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I do believe that. I do believe that angels have, uh, for lack of a better way of explaining it, different levels of experience, so to speak, or maybe that's not even the right word, but just kind of like these different levels in terms of, how long they've existed, or, kind of the energy that they hold. And so, yeah, the names that feel a little bit more ancient or a little bit more kind of different have a different energy associated with them. They have a different, most likely, role, and they just have different, we'll say, experience in terms of what they've done in the past, throughout. And it's weird to say past, because I feel like when we're talking about on a spiritual plane, there is no time. So it is kind of a weird concept
Yeah,
to
it's like,
grasp to our human mind, because we're talking about past and future because we are time and like 3D, but
yeah,
also on a spiritual level, there is really no time. So it's kind of a weird thing
it's a
in
weird
that
thing.
sense,
Yeah,
but I do definitely feel like their names, like you said, definitely it's for our benefit. And I feel like it's also a way in which we are able to more deeply connect with their essence, and if you think about, even like, I'm sure when you were thinking about names for your daughter, it was like, does that name feel right? No, this name, no. Like, you know what I mean? And then after the fact, like, I think back now to the different names that I was thinking about for my younger daughter, and it's like, she's definitely not that. Like, I'm so glad we didn't name her that, even though in the time I love that name, but it's like, knowing her now, it's like she's not that. Like, she is not that energy. She's,
yeah,
what I mean?
totally.
So it's
That's,
kind of similar like that, where you can pick up on the essence of their energy based on the name too.
yeah, and that's a whole other trip and rabbit hole to go into,
Yeah.
like, and how are they born, like what is their
Right.
journey? What's going on with
Yeah.
them, like their origin. And of course that's a mystery, but yeah, their own journey and their own, how they come to be and when and how and what for, and what's their trajectory is so interesting
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah. Absolutely. I've had conversations with people where I've seen that they, well, for one, a lot of the times I see at least one of the guardian angels that is like, it's almost like they've been best friends, or like they're siblings. Like, there's this bond
Oh,
that they have, like that they've had like forever, kind of a thing. Like, I've seen that. I've also seen it where they have had a past life together. So where they were both like in a physical form, and then in a later life, like that guardian angel, that being is coming through as just on a spirit level, you know what I mean? While
yeah,
this one is incarnated. So I've seen a lot of different, so there's no set, like, this is how it is. It's very individual and very unique. And that's
yeah,
why I believe also everyone has a different number. Like, not everyone has the same, it's not always like the set
yeah.
amount. The average, like the most common, is 3, but I've seen up to 5 for
Ah,
people.
wow.
Yeah.
You must have
And
so
that
much
is
to do
also,
and take
it's
care
like,
of. You need
yeah.
5.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
And that, I feel, is also really much dependent simply on your soul's journey. And it doesn't mean that the one who has 3 and the one who has 5, like, if you have 5, you're more blessed, or you're more
Right.
whatever, you're more angelic. It's not like that. It's
Yeah,
just really just a matter of what your path is, and
yeah, what you're here to do.
what you're here to do, what the support is. You know what I mean? So it's just very unique.
Yeah.
You can't, there's no set, like, this is how it is. It's very
Hmm.
unique to each person.
Wait, I'm stuck on something you just said that also blew my mind. So, a human soul can
Yes.
eventually just come through for someone not as a guide, but
Yes.
angel.
As an angel, because there are angelic origin souls that are from angelic origin that come as humans, but
Oh,
hold the
right.
angelic
Right.
frequency. You
They've
know what I mean?
incarnated in human form, but they're actually their soul is already
Yeah.
angel,
Yes, yes,
and they
exactly.
come in and have that human experience, but then they go back and to being
Yeah,
angel.
yeah. So it's
Okay,
not
it's
so
not
much
like
like
we
a
can level up.
yeah,
Just
yeah, exactly. I was
okay.
just about to say that. So it's not so much like we're human and we're trying to level up to the next thing.
Yeah.
It's more so about understanding where your soul originates from and understanding that you may have angelic origin and therefore even though you're a human, you have that origin, you know?
What?
Yeah.
That's gonna be a great episode. We have
I
to
know.
we have to have a conversation just about that. That's
Yes, yes.
amazing.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. Okay, looking forward to that, because that, if we start talking about that, we're not stopping for an hour.
I know.
Uh,
We'll save it for another episode. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
that's
yeah.
amazing. So we make the contract. We have a plan. We put together a team, and then we come and do
Yeah.
our thing.
Yes. Yes. And so then on top of that, I feel like it's also, I mean, we're talking about as individuals, but then we put into the mix our spouse, our friendships, our children, and then now there's this whole mix of things that are happening and going on where I feel like, and this is where I feel like it gets a little bit complex and a little bit mind boggling because you think about
All
all the threads.
interconnected. The level of
Yeah,
detail and planning
exactly.
when you're weaving everyone's stories together, that's,
Exactly.
yeah, that's mind-boggling. I've always had this picture, mental picture of the goldfish in a tank in an apartment. How do you
Mm,
begin to explain that he's a goldfish, but that he's on a fishbowl, not in the
yeah,
sea or whatever, in an
right.
apartment in Vancouver, that is a country, inside a planet,
Yeah.
inside a solar system? Like, there's just no way
Yeah.
to approach truth, like, yeah, to begin to get to a place where you can explain. So I think I feel like that fish.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yes,
and
exactly.
it's like, there's no way. That's why there's certain things that just, there's no point in starting to explain that stuff to us, because we're just not there
Right.
yet.
Right.
We can't,
Absolutely.
until we level up in our own
Yeah.
way.
Exactly. Exactly. And I feel like that's such a great example. Actually, I really love that analogy. And I think part of that too is understanding that there's always going to be some mysteries to life that we're not necessarily meant to understand.
Yeah.
And, probably we'll never understand as long as we are in this human. I don't know if once we go back into the spiritual realms, if we do actually understand everything and we're like, oh, okay, I see it all now.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think so, but
And there's levels to that too, I'm guessing. Like,
yeah,
this is
yeah,
such a long journey back to wherever we came from, that I also think that as much as you can go microscopic and see things, like, there seems to always be something smaller and smaller. I think the same
yeah,
applies
yeah,
in the opposite direction. And there's always, like, what we think of as God could have a bigger something, right?
yeah,
Like, that is a
yeah,
God too. Her, him,
exactly.
whatever. Yeah, it gets mind-boggling and really interesting the more you think about it. But
Yeah,
uh,
exactly. And you know what I actually just thought of too? I don't know why this memory just came in, but a memory just remembered from when I was a child. I would sometimes have these moments. I would say maybe like 5 or 6, maybe 7 years old, where I would have these moments of feeling like I was I don't know how to explain this. Like I was like a doll or like like a character
mhm.
in that there was this bigger hand that was like, kind of moving me around
Oh,
or
interesting.
whatever, which is, I feel like comparative now to the hand of God or whatever you
Yeah.
want to call it, that I am here in this world that's not real, quote unquote, that
Yeah.
this is, as some books call it, as an illusion, that
Yeah.
our human physical being is an illusion, that there's a bigger truth. And so I would have those moments where I would almost imagine that I'm just this like a whatever doll or whatever you want to call it, and there was a bigger hand that was
Yeah.
in control or like moving pieces, which I didn't understand at the time. I don't know why I even thought
Right.
that. I don't think that I
That
ever
was, yeah, such a
connected it
download
to,
that you needed to then
yeah,
remember as an adult. But yeah,
yeah,
totally.
exactly. And I don't know why that just came in, but I wanted to share that because I
And
think it
maybe
kind
that's
of
it. It's just
plays
a
into
big, yeah,
a
chessboard. We're
yeah.
just puppets, Christina.
Yeah,
We're just
exactly.
puppets. Uh,
This is all virtual reality, and
this
at
is
one
the
point we'll take our
Matrix, and
goggles
yeah,
off and we'll be like, "Whoa, that was a trip."
yeah, exactly. This is so, but it's so funny, and I guess that's why. Kidding aside, like that movie, like the Matrix, I was like,
Oh
I
yeah.
feel like that's speaking truth to me on some level. I think like there's
Yeah,
something deeper here
for
around
sure.
just us living in a reality that's not quite it.
Mhm.
And that there's
Yeah.
so much going on in the background that we don't even
Yeah.
imagine. And yeah, we can be chess pieces, and yeah, they're probably our higher self is just laughing and just
Yeah,
doing this.
exactly.
And we're here consumed with our day to day and bedtimes and things, and it's just a silly game.
Right, right. Exactly. And I think that that's a big part of it at the end of the day. It's looking at what are we I mean, it's hard because on one hand, you're living that day-to-day life. So there's mundane, everyday things that feel like the biggest, like the biggest whatever. Like it's we put so much importance on it. When at the end of the day, is it really that important? When you look at it at the big picture. So it's kind of that duality of, yeah, it is important because I'm living in my everyday life, and this is like feels like a big thing. But then when I try to zoom out and think of the overall bigger picture, it removes that sense of actually maybe it's not that big of a deal in the
Yeah.
bigger scheme of
It's
everything.
a
You know
great
what I
way if
mean?
we could move through the world like that and trying to, because sometimes I get there in terms of like trying when there's something challenging and trying to go out and like, okay, and that's where the angels are super important. Like, what is the bigger
Yeah.
picture here? What are we doing? But also like, this is silly. I'm just gonna wake up and this is not real, so that's fine.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
at some point. But yeah, being aware and being in touch with your spirituality, your angels, God, it's really helpful in that way, bringing perspective and just your priorities in check in terms of what actually matters is it's love, is connection, is
Yeah.
experiences, is some other stuff outside of what we tend to over focus on,
Yeah.
especially now. Again, social media and the
Yeah.
modern world and content and
Yeah.
capitalism is just whole very distracting, and it's very hard to
Yeah.
think about your spirituality in your day to day, and you're preoccupied because you don't have the latest whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, yeah, it's just a crazy, I don't know. I feel like there's so many different things too that we could go into. Like, they're so
Oh yeah,
mind-boggling about
the
this whole
God
thing.
conversation and the chess piece analogy, we could go into that for hours too. That's a good episode. And the divine
Yeah.
and God and whatever it is that
Yeah.
you're experiencing as that, and how powerful it is to go through life also aware that as much as that is something bigger than you, it's something that is also inside of you.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, and tapping into that
Yeah.
knowing and that energy is so important.
Yeah, and something that's coming through right now, I just want to share because I feel like this is an important message, but I just feel like to know that presence, like God, the divine, whatever you call it, but to know that is to know yourself, I feel like,
Mm,
because like you said, it's around us, but it's also within us. And I do feel like as I've personally developed my connection directly with God, that has helped me to understand more about me and who I am, or
mm.
even why I'm here. Like I feel like there's a connection there where it's not something that's just like this outward relationship with this bigger energy that is, whatever. But I also feel like it's helped me to directly know more about myself too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And trusting in that wisdom within, and that there's a little piece, like you're a drop of water is not the ocean, but
Yeah.
it's like
Right.
you're
Yeah.
the it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You're part of a bigger something,
Yeah.
but it's within you somehow. So it's very comforting. It's really nice, and it helps you put things in perspective. Yeah, just as the angels do in your everyday life, and just having that connection with the divine and with the angels just helps so
Yeah.
much moving through this world in a less painful way, and you have more compassion for others and yourself, and you can kind of almost look at things from that outsider perspective and the one moving the chess piece, and it's just
Hmm.
like not a big deal. This is just, it feels forever, but this is really a short amount of time, all things
Yeah.
considered. So let's make
Yeah.
the most out of it, and focus on the important things, and those relationships we're building with our partners, our kids, and our families, and how do
Yeah.
we help each other go through this experience. It's so painful already. We don't need to
Yeah.
aggravate it.
Right.
We let's just help each other get through this. It's hard
Yeah.
enough to be human.
Yeah, it truly is. It really, really is. So, yeah, I love that, everything that you just shared. And I feel like on that note, I want to encourage those of you who are listening in or watching to share with us in the comments below, if you're watching on YouTube, what, regarding this conversation, what are your beliefs around, how it all plays, how the bigger divine energy plays a role in your life? What questions do you have? Because, like we shared, there's like so many
So many.
rabbit holes that we can go down. So we're happy to go down those rabbit holes with you. So let us know what questions you have around that, and maybe, if there's any specific topics that you want us to cover, let us know in the comments. And as always, your support is always super, super helpful. So, subscribing, liking, sharing this episode, leaving your reviews, all of that is always so beneficial. So we really appreciate that.
We really,
So,
really do. Yeah, we could go on and on for hours, and there's so many ways to get lost. And that's what the podcast is about, doing that. Exactly. That's what we're here for, to have all of
exactly.
those interesting conversations
Yes.
with you and for you. So, yeah, that's great. Just let us know what you want to talk about and what resonates for you. I feel like, because everyone's experience is, of course, so individual, like there's certain things that just speak truth
Mm-hmm.
to you on a personal level. So, yeah, hearing what that looks like for different people, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't wait. I can't wait. So yeah, on that note, I think that this was such a great conversation. I
Ah,
can't wait to continue.
you know.
And yeah, like we've been saying, the different rabbit holes. We'll go down the rabbit holes together. Take you along for the ride. I can't wait. Thank you, as always, again, for all of your love and support and for being a part of this community. We absolutely appreciate and love every single one of you. And so, as always, we are sending you so much love and angel blessings, and we will see you in the next one.
See you in the next one. Bye.